There's a special kind of fear reserved for crimes that happen in places people associate with safety, or even holiness. A church at night is supposed to feel like a refuge. Quiet, still, protected. But on the night of October 12, 1974, that illusion shattered forever. Arliss Perry was only 19 years old, a newlywed. She and her husband had recently moved to California so he could attend Stanford University. That night, after a disagreement, Arliss left their apartment to cool off. She told her husband she wanted to take a walk, and that she planned to go to Stanford Memorial Church to pray. It wasn't unusual. Not for someone overwhelmed, trying to find calm in the middle of a new life. Around 11:15 p.m., she entered the church. She never came home. By midnight, her husband was worried. He went looking for her. When he arrived at the church, it was locked and dark. He contacted campus security. Hours later, around 5:45 in the morning, security guard discovered Arliss' body inside. The scene was horrifying, not only because she'd been killed, but because investigators found details suggesting the scene had been staged in a ritual-like way. Religious items, positioned deliberately. It wasn't a random assault. It looked intentional, calculated, and disturbingly symbolic. And yet, despite the seriousness, the case went cold. Decades passed. The evidence sat in storage through generations of detectives, through changing technology, through the slow erosion of hope. But then, in 2018, modern testing finally pulled a usable DNA profile from preserved evidence. And when investigators ran it, it matched the very man who found her, Stephen Crawford. Now at first glance, someone might say, of course his DNA would be there. He entered the church, but that's not where it ended. Because Crawford had something crucial, something that narrowed the suspect pool to almost nothing. He had access. Security guards have keys. They know schedules. They know which doors lock automatically and which don't. They know where someone could hide until closing time. When detectives went to his home to question him in July 2018, Crawford took his own life before they could speak to him. No confession, no final explanation. Just a death that landed like an answer nobody wanted. The case was officially closed, with Crawford identified as the perpetrator. And for Arliss' family, the truth arrived after 44 years late. Incomplete, but undeniable. Because sometimes, the most chilling part of a case isn't what happened. It's realizing how long the person responsible stood in plain sight, close enough to touch the investigation itself. Now we move to a case where the answer didn't come from a suspect being arrested. It came from a body being exhumed. January 1976, Woodridge, Illinois. Pamela Morrow was 16 years old when she disappeared. She was last seen walking near her home on a cold winter day, one of those ordinary moments that should have been forgettable. Days later, her body was found in a field in a nearby area. The crime devastated the community. Investigators chased leads, questioned classmates, tracked routines, and looked for anyone who might have been watching. But this was the 1970s. Forensics were limited. DNA technology was still science fiction. The case went cold. And for decades, Pamela's family lived with a grief that never fully matured into closure, until investigators decided to take a bold step. In 2020, they exhumed Bruce Lindahl, a man who had died in 1981. He'd been linked, at least in theory, to other violent incidents. But he died before he could ever be fully confronted in court. Exhumations aren't dramatic like movies. They're clinical, careful, and heavy with respect. The goal is simple. Extract DNA and compare it. When they compared his DNA to preserved evidence, it matched. After 44 years, Pamela's family finally had a name, but the relief came with a brutal catch. Lindahl had been dead for almost 40 years. No trial, no sentencing. No courtroom moment where a judge says the victim's name out loud as justice. Just the truth arriving too late to punish anyone, but not too late to answer the question that ruins families. Who did this? And that answer immediately raised another question. If he did this once, how many more times did he do it? 3 years later, another disappearance in Illinois would haunt investigators for nearly half a century. March 1979, North Aurora, Illinois. Kathy Hollow was 19 years old. She vanished under suspicious circumstances. Family knew instantly something was wrong. She wasn't the type to vanish without telling anyone. Searches began. Leads came in, and then, weeks later, her remains were discovered in the Fox River. Water complicates everything. It degrades evidence. It washes away trace material. It makes forensic testing hard even decades later. So for years, Kathy's case stayed stuck in the same place. A file marked unsolved. A family still waiting. An evidence that simply wouldn't produce a profile. But technology evolves. And sometimes that evolution changes what's possible. In 2024, investigators used a specialized technique in VA-C designed to recover DNA from fabric and surfaces where standard swabbing fails. They applied it to clothing that had been stored for decades. It worked. They got a profile. And that profile matched the same man tied to Pamela's murder, Bruce Lynn. For Kathy's family, it was closure and heartbreak at once. Closure because, after 45 years, they finally had the truth. Heartbreak because the truth was attached to someone who could never face them, never answer questions, never suffer consequences in a courtroom. And for investigators, it confirmed something terrifying. This wasn't one isolated crime. This was a pattern spread across communities, across years, designed to avoid detection. Case 9. Ruth Marie Terry. The Lady of the Dunes finally gets her name back. Few cases capture the public imagination like an unidentified victim. Not because it is entertaining, but because it feels wrong in a way that is hard to explain. A person shouldn't die and become a mystery label. But for nearly 50 years, that's exactly what happened in Provincetown, Massachusetts. July 26, 1974. A woman walking her dog found a body partially buried in dunes near Race Point Beach. The victim had been dead for weeks. The injuries were severe. Identification was impossible with the tools available at the time. She became known as the Lady of the Dunes. Theories exploded: organized crime, drifters, secret identities. But decades passed. Media attention came in waves. Nothing held. Until genetic genealogy brought the dead back into the world of the living. In 2022, DNA was extracted and compared using public genealogy databases. The victim finally had a name: Ruth Marie Terry. And once investigators had her name, they could build her life backward: relationships, timelines, movements. That's when the case shifted from who is she to who killed her. Authorities identified her husband, Guy Moldovan, as responsible. He had already been tied to other suspicious cases and disappearances. But he died in 2002. So again, a case solved by science, but robbed of a courtroom ending. Still, there was one priceless thing Ruth got back: her identity. She stopped being a headline nickname. She became a real person, again someone whose life mattered enough to be named. Because sometimes the first act of justice is simply saying, "This was Ruth, not Lady of the Dunes, Ruth." Case 10. Christy Mirak. The DJ everyone knew. Our final case reminds us of one of the hardest truths in true crime. The perpetrator doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes he looks like somebody you've seen at community events, somebody you've smiled at, somebody you would never think twice about. December 21, 1992, East Lampeter Township, Pennsylvania. Christy Mirak was 25 years old, an elementary school teacher known for her kindness. She was found murdered in her home. No forced entry, nothing stolen. This wasn't a random burglary. It looked like intent. Investigators collected DNA from the Sean, but in 1992, DNA databases were limited. The profile existed, but it had nowhere to match, so it sat, waiting, for 26 years. Then, in 2018, investigators used genetic genealogy, family trees, relatives, long chains of connection that eventually narrowed to one man: Raymond Rowe, a local DJ and entertainer. A familiar name, not someone people expected. Police collected DNA from something he discarded: gum. It matched. Rowe was arrested in June 2018. He pleaded guilty rather than face trial. Life without parole. But the guilty plea left a hole that still bothers people. Why her? What made him choose Christy? Was it opportunistic? Planned? A fixation? He didn't explain. And that's often what families get even when they win justice. A conviction without clarity. Because the justice system can punish a person, but it can't always restore meaning. Closing for your channel. Voice 5 more cases. 5 different endings. Some solved while the perpetrator was alive. Some solved after death. Some solved by DNA alone, with no confession, no motive, no satisfying why. But every one of them proves the same thing. A case isn't truly gone just because time passes. Not if evidence is preserved. Not if families keep pushing. Not if technology keeps evolving. And not if we keep telling their stories. Till someone out there hears something, remembers something, and realizes the missing piece has been living in their head for years. This is Unsolved Crimes.